You take this position at Canlis as executive chef, and you're obviously young, but you have this experience at other places from around the country. When a place has such a track record like Canlis has, and this might serve as some advice for somebody who's listening who might have just gotten an executive chef offer, or they're coming into a place that's been open for a while, but they haven't worked there for years and years at this point. How did you balance embracing tradition versus like
Yeah.
implementing change when you come into a place that's well established?
Embrace the tradition first, like first and foremost. I think it could have been easy to come in hot. Um, I don't think I put a dish on the menu for like 4 months or something like that.
Wow.
I mean, also I didn't. Um, I never saw a dinner service. Like I did a tasting during the day and I ate dinner, but then I also like I never like worked this service, which like in hindsight, it's like was I would have done that differently, but just because it would have provided more context. Not that it would have changed
Right.
anything, but I think that would have just been helpful because there was like a 2 month gap between like 2 or 3 month gap between trying out and then starting that position. Um, I think embracing tradition was like the most important thing. I think you know I had no clue what I was getting into. I only knew of like that restaurant as an institution. I had no clue like what they were trying to do. Like I had talked philosophically with them for like a day or two when I was here for my tryout, and I liked them, and like we seemed to like vibe in that way. But yeah, I think when I landed, it was like, okay, this is like there's a lot here that like I really don't understand, and there's so many like layers to this onion that you have to peel. And they had it wasn't like a straight handoff from like the previous chef too. Like there was like a 4 to 6 month sort of like 4 month period of like where they were like chefless, and they had like they really just kind of leaned on their sous chef team. And so I wanted to be sensitive to that. Like I don't think you should just come in like and like rip the tablecloth off, so to speak. Which I wanted to actually do, take the tablecloth off, but like it was like okay, just learn and like kind of get to know like how things work here, embrace the change, and then just slowly like as things like become like unservable because of seasonality or whatever, like I think um then just start to like put one or two dishes on. And I think, for that was like a pretty controversial move, I think like internally, not among the brothers. Like they had my full support, but or I had their full support rather, but like I think some of the chef team or like the cooks and stuff were wanting this person to come in and just like really like this is what we're gonna do. And that just wasn't my style. Like I think that like maybe like the curve would have been like a little bit like shorter or something, but I think that like it would have been a lot harder, and it would have like lost it would have been a lot more attrition like early if you just do that, because the other side of the coin is like, who the hell is this person? And like I've worked here for 5 years or 8 years or 10 years or 15 years, right? So which there are like plenty of those. So yeah, I would say like embrace the tradition first and foremost, like learn, and then like I like kept a notebook and was like, these are the things I like to see change. Like these are the ways that like I think would be cool. And a place like that big, I think like Tomo is like a speedboat. We can like move pretty like agile. Like we aren't right now because we're new, but like we can like make 45-degree turns or like 60-degree turns. Like Canvas is like a large vessel that just makes 1 degree turns. So early on, I just adopted that approach. With like you know I want to change sourcing. So like how does that look? Like what do I believe in? What are my values? Like what are the tenets? Like state them, teach them, and then implement them, and then like continue to surround your people that like believe in that vision. Plateware was another thing, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then like you can start making like once you build that trust, you can start making kind of like the broader sweeping changes, and just my situation was very different than like I think the current situation where there wasn't a restaurant. It was like I was like walking into a very busy restaurant from night one, and here it was like okay, things need to be like reconstructed in a way. Um, and I think I should have done a good job of that. But two totally different like situations to enter for sure. So I just was like treading lightly. It was like I want to like learn these classic dishes. I want to like learn why they're important to the restaurant, and then like you kind of figure out pretty quickly what's like sacred or not too sacred, and like as you build that trust, they're willing to like give you a little bit more leeway to guide things the way that you see it or you'd like to.
When you're getting ready to leave, or maybe as you're kind of like thinking of, okay, I want to do my next thing after this position
Yeah.
that I have, are there things that you have top of mind where you're like, I want to see how the finances run. I want to get a little bit of a sense of HR. I want to form some sourcing relationships. Like what other, because there's the food that I think a lot of people like think that that's all that executive chefs do, but there's so many other things that you can pull from a place like that that can set you
Yeah.
up for greater success going into a project like Tomo, where there are
Mhm.
things that you tried to kind of like extract is the wrong word, but just kind of like learn as part of your
Yeah,
position
learning
that
to
you
put
had
it out.
at Canlis.
Yeah. I mean, I think like what we always say is like, every experience should be like an opportunity to like learn and unlearn, right? So it was like I've like staged at restaurants where I'm like, this was a shitty stage, but I learned a lot. Like I will never run my kitchen this way. It's horrible. But like I learned a ton, and like about not wanting to do things, and not that was not my experience at Killen. Right. But I think that like over the course of 6 years, yeah, you're kind of cataloging things. I mean, like sourcing's easy. I mean, like I really like, for me, everything like begins and ends with products. So like sourcing was like the kind of like the first thing I wanted to make mine. Um, and kind of change that, and we did that like to the extreme there. Um, you have the gift of space there. You also have the curse of volume, so it's like that kind of push pull here. Whereas like here we don't have crazy volume, but we have very little space. So it's not like we just have like a tank of live shellfish like floating around somewhere, um, which we did at the time. And um, but I do think, I mean, you learn things along the way. I mean, like I had like access to like they're pretty open with me about like the budget, like, and I was friends with the controller, and like I could ask questions. I mean, you get held accountable, right? So you kind of learn like, hey, my strengths are, for example, like in food costs, and like I run fat and labor, and like this is getting into like the nuts and bolts of running a kitchen and restaurant. But you kind of realize like, and especially in a place like that, like where you can like make up for, things like, and for example, there it was like, we served really good ingredients. We also like, charged like 145 or whatever it was. So like food costs, especially when you're vegetable centric, can like be balanced out if you have to run with like a much bigger kitchen. And I ran with a much bigger kitchen than people prior. And I think like I took the same philosophy here. I think that like, like we're obviously like very vegetable forward menu, but like the goal here is to staff up so we can like be more creative and be more like I would love to be here with my CDC on today and not have to worry about prep and only work here on creative stuff, and then she can be off tomorrow, or something like that. And then we have like a game plan. So we're trying to create like, those are things that you're always trying to like, I mean, extract isn't a horrible word, but I think like, take from like things like from the experience, you learn a bunch, and then you also unlearn, like, and you're like, okay, how would I do things differently? And that's kind of how we ended up here. I mean, I work for two very different institutions, right? Like Roberta's is its own institution in a different way, and remain close to them and kind of seeing like their expansion, and it's super cool and totally different than like the Canlis approach to like institutionalization. So, um, like there's a lot to learn from working in both environments. I think for sure that's like, and also just like eating a lot. Like I ate around a ton. Like I really like had the kind of gift of like being able to travel a bunch and experience like restaurants in a way that I never had experienced before. And I think that was like even as like formative in the conceptualization of like ideas of what my restaurant would be.
Can you double click on that a little bit, because
Yeah,
I share the same advice to chefs of eating and go, not just the stereotypical like walk through a farmer's market and take a bite out of a turnip kind of eating, but genuinely like sit through a tasting menu, order the
yeah,
supplemental cheese course, like do tea after your dessert.
yeah,
Like all those sorts of things help influence how you, it gives you a point of view. And so I guess when you're having these
yeah.
experiences, how do you approach that, or what advice would you give to someone who's like, why would I eat it when I can just go stage there? Why would I kind of why would I
Totally.
spend the money to go do that?
I mean, if you could afford a stage, which I mean, staging is so expensive, in its own way, like you're not getting paid. So my stages, I was not fortunate enough to do any long-term stages. I just wasn't in like a financial position, so it was like a lot of like 1 day, 2 day stuff, which kind of limits like where you can stage. But I mean, I think like for me, it was like it was for me it was to like kind of like add more tools to the tool belt, and then staging also could add some tools to the tool belt, but like not necessarily like I had like the flexibility to like eat at through the 50 best list or something, nor did I want to, but it was like, all right, I'm gonna be in like this place, like what is like the culture of this place? You're in Spain, like go to like a nice you know you know tasting menu or something like that at night, but then like walk through like the bars and like eat like pinchos and stuff, and like I think that's like immersing yourself in like culture. I think is like super important, especially like in cuisines that you're not like familiar with. I think is like important too, because then you start to see like influence how things are derivative, and then that can help frame your own sort of like style or like culinary language, I guess. But yeah, I mean, eating is super important. I think just like like I really like my tastes have changed over time, right? Like I'm like I want to like sit at the bar and like eat more casually now than I did when I was like in my early 20s. When I couldn't even afford to like eat tasty menus and you'd spend your whole paycheck like hoping that like they would recognize your industry and like cut you a little bit of a break and like send a supplemental course or something like that. But I think that's been like super. I mean, in terms of like learning and unlearning too, you're like, okay, as like the guest, what is it about this place that like I click with and then I like? Because like ultimately, like you're creating something for the person sitting in the chair, not the person in the kitchen, right? So I think that was like cool. Like I think one of the practices I did at Canvas that was encouraged by them that was like actually super helpful was like I did this like internal like kind of like scorecard, and it wasn't like it wasn't like to be critical, but like I would eat a meal and then I'd go back and like critically think about it and like what did I like about this place? And especially when you're like I was dining with like coworkers, or like one of the Chemist brothers, like you kind of see where like your preferences are so different, right? Like I value this in service, but not this, and they value this and not this, or like like is the best hawker like stall in the world, better than the 15th best fine dining restaurant? Like to me, yeah, because like they do one thing really, really well, and I think it's important to like embrace that and kind of like immerse ourselves that like what cuisine can be like all through the spectrum. And I think like the world's moving more in that direction. Like the industry's moving in that direction. I think more and more, especially like post pandemic, like the pursuit of relevancy has changed, or like what that looks like. It's a good time.
Repertoire, the Repertoire podcast. Repertoire.